I'll be honest, I might not be the smartest or most perceptive person around, and there's no point in dwelling on it. It took me a while to realize what's been going on behind my back, and now that I'm aware, I could use some assistance figuring out what steps to take next. Of course, I still have feelings for her, but I can't stand her anymore. And when it comes to the kids, what am I supposed to do? Just thinking about my kids makes me feel sick to my stomach, and I end up rushing to the bathroom to throw up all the Jack Daniels I drank, which cost me $30. Let me begin from the start. My name's Simon Messina, and I've been married to Janice for 9 years. We first met a little over 10 years ago when I got injured at work. I'd cut my hand with a chisel, needing stitches, and Janice was a nurse in the ER. She was all business, even though I tried to catch her attention beyond just being a patient. She was quite the looker, too. Dark hair tied in a ponytail, 5'7", long legs, fit, with a good figure. I couldn't help but gaze into her brown eyes while she focused on giving me a shot of Novocaine to ease the pain before stitching me up. It's funny how once you notice someone, you start seeing them everywhere, like when you decide on a car model and suddenly see it all over town. That's how it was with Janice. I spotted her around town often, usually with some guy, appearing happy together. One evening they were at a bar I frequented. I observed as Janice and her boyfriend got a bit loud, then he got up and left. Janice stayed with her friends, looking annoyed. I turned away before she noticed me, but I listened in, and Janice, being a bit tipsy, was easy to hear. She was ranting about her boyfriend being jealous, and she was fed up with it. I left before my eavesdropping got too obvious. It was about 2 weeks later when I spotted her at the bar again, this time with her girlfriends and no boyfriend in sight. The band started playing a song I liked, so I headed over to her table. "Hey, not sure if you remember me from the ER a couple of months back. I'm Simon. Would you like to dance?" She looked at me for a moment before responding. "Yeah, the guy with the cut hand. Sure, let's dance." That's when my journey with Janice began, and I felt like the luckiest guy alive. We dated for a month before things got intimate. She wasn't rushing, and I respected that. Our first time together was straight out of a romance novel. We had a lovely dinner at an Italian restaurant, indulging in delicious pasta, 2 bottles of good wine, and tiramisu for dessert. I didn't plan to get Janice drunk, but I hoped it might ease her inhibitions a bit. We went back to my place. Until then, I'd been with about 10 women, but nothing compared to that night with Janice. She was passionate. I didn't care about Janice's past experiences in the bedroom as long as she was now mine and mine alone. She never gave me a reason to doubt her commitment. 4 months after our first dance, I took Janice back to the tavern where it all began and proposed to her. She said yes, and we chose the first Saturday in June for our wedding. About 2 months into our engagement, I was chilling in the same tavern with a buddy when Janice's ex walked by our table on his way out. He stopped and glanced at me. "You're Janice's fiancé, right?" "Yeah, I hope there's no problem since she and I didn't start dating until after you two broke up." "Nah, we had our reasons for splitting. Or at least I had mine. I just wish you both the best if you end up tying the knot, especially considering her quirks about being exclusive." With that, he left. I figured he was just bitter and shook my head. There are a few more things from my past you should know because they become relevant later. First, I was a standout wrestler in high school, earning a scholarship to a state university. Everything was going well until my junior year when I got injured wrestling a guy from our rival school. He kneed me in the groin out of spite for losing. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital getting drained, and when I recovered, I was out for the rest of the season. I lost interest in school, dropped out of college, and got a job with a local builder. The other wrestler got booted from the team and lost his scholarship, but I didn't press charges to move past it. Secondly, I lost my father when I was 12, and my mother passed away 10 years later. With no siblings and distant extended family, I felt a void until I found solace in Janice's mother, Penny, who became like a parent to me. Janice's father left when she was a teenager, so it was just the 3 of us. Despite Janice sending him cards every year, he never responded or attended our wedding. Instead, her mother walked her down the aisle. I work as a Finnish carpenter specializing in restoration projects. I'm among the top in the business on the West Coast, mainly restoring old mansions owned by wealthy individuals. With rates ranging from $75 to $100 per hour, I make around $150K annually. Not bad for someone who didn't finish college. However, this means I have to travel and spend 1 or 2 weeks away from home each month. The challenge of working for affluent clients is that they can treat you either as insignificant or invisible. For instance, I once worked for a young actress in Los Angeles who purchased a 10,000 square foot house and was spending millions to restore it. She would often lounge naked by the pool while I worked inside, seemingly unaware of my presence. Once, while working on a house in Beverly Hills, I witnessed something similar. The lady of the house was having an affair with the pool boy in broad daylight. They were engaging in intimate acts on a chaise lounge, changing positions multiple times. It bothered me because I liked her husband. He treated me with respect, like an equal. He was a wealthy Hollywood producer who would come home from work, crack open 2 beers, and chat with me about my day and the progress of the job, offering me one of the beers from his fridge filled with domestic long necks. Although I felt bad about his wife's infidelity, I didn't confront him in case it was part of their arrangement. I didn't want to shatter him by saying, "Your wife is cheating on you." Instead, after completing the job and receiving payment, I anonymously called him at his office to break the news. He thanked me, and later I learned he was filing for divorce, indicating it wasn't an arrangement they had. Now back to my current dilemma. Janice and I have 2 kids. This is where you'll see how foolish I can be. But before you judge too harshly, remember that when our first child was born, Janice and her mother were my world. When Janice told me she was pregnant 3 years into our marriage, I was ecstatic. I spent weeks preparing the baby's room with oak crown moldings and fancy sashes around the windows and doors. It was a beautiful space. When Jacob was born, I rushed to the hospital within half an hour of Penny's call, having scheduled only local jobs before and after the due date to ensure I could be there for the birth. Janice was all set for childbirth, and I was mentally going over the Lamaze lessons, preparing to coach her through it. 3 hours later, the doctor announced, "Here we go," and little Jacob arrived. While many new dads may get nervous or even faint during such moments, nothing could have prepared me for the shock I felt when the nurse handed Jacob to me, and I saw he looked partly black. Both Janice and Penny glanced at Jacob, and then at me. Penny felt we needed to have a conversation. She took me aside and revealed why Jacob looked the way he did. "Simon, we're sorry we didn't tell you earlier, but it's time you knew the truth. My father was mixed race with a black mother and a white father. We were afraid you might not marry Janice if you knew she was part black." "That doesn't make sense, Penny. Why would that matter to me? I never judged anyone based on their skin color. I was simply telling you about the guy who ended my wrestling career." "That's a relief, Simon, because your son will need your love and acceptance. Also, we never mentioned my brother who lives in Denver." Penny showed me a photo of a dark-skinned man from her wallet. "This is my brother Henry. He's a few years younger than me, and it caused some issues when our family went out because he had darker skin while I looked white. People could be really rude, staring or even asking intrusive questions. Eventually, my parents moved to San Francisco in the 60s because it was more accepting." I heard Penny's story, which seemed reasonable, and I didn't want to be one of those rude or bigoted people she mentioned, so I didn't press the matter further. I finally met Penny's brother at the first Christmas after Jacob was born. Janice introduced him as Uncle Henry. Henry mentioned he was moving back to Portland from Denver to be closer to family, and soon after, he moved into Penny's house. Uncle Henry started visiting our house regularly to spend time with Jacob. However, I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable when observing Penny and her brother together. While they never crossed any boundaries, their closeness as siblings seemed unusual. One day, during a barbecue at Penny's house, while everyone else was in the backyard, I took a peek into the bedrooms. After checking Penny's and Henry's rooms, I felt relieved seeing they each had their own space, but appearances can be deceiving. After our second child, a girl named after my mother Jeannie, was born, I felt that a family of 4 was perfect for us. We had 2 healthy children, a boy and a girl, which felt like more than enough. I discussed this with Janice, and she agreed that we could focus on raising our 2 wonderful kids. When I suggested getting a vasectomy, Janice preferred getting an IUD instead, leaving room for us to change our minds in the future. So that's what we decided to do. 2 wonderful years of family life passed, and then I was hired to work on a restoration project for a pleasant middle-aged couple, Sharon and Tim, who were both OB-GYNs. One day, during a conversation that touched on topics usually reserved for doctors, I mentioned to Sharon that Janice had been using an IUD for a while. Sharon suggested an alternative, as prolonged use of an IUD can sometimes cause issues for women. She proposed that I undergo a vasectomy but freeze my material as a precaution. I thought it was a good idea and decided to surprise Janice with the news of my vasectomy for Valentine's Day. It might not have been the most romantic gift, but it was better than a household appliance. My doctor referred me to a clinic where I could store my material and have the vasectomy done. The clinic's doctor explained that it would take a few appointments to collect it, so I scheduled appointments for the next 3 Fridays. It felt a bit strange to enter the small room they had set up for collection. They had some adult content there to, get things going. I flipped through a Penthouse Letters magazine and came across some wild stories. Some of them didn't sit well with me, like those where a husband watched as his wife entertained multiple men, or those where wives wanted well-endowed men. However, I enjoyed the story about a wife surprising her husband with a three-way involving her best friend. I managed to provide my sample before finishing that story, so I never found out if it was a one-time thing. Afterward, I handed the nurse my sample and told her I'd be back the next week. Tuesday morning, I received a call from the doctor asking me to come in either that afternoon or the next day. I inquired if we could discuss the matter over the phone, but he insisted on a face-to-face conversation. I agreed to come in that afternoon, while my mind raced with thoughts that they might have found cancer in my sperm, given my family history of early death. As I drove to the clinic, my mind was consumed with concerns about how I would take care of my family's well-being. Upon arrival, the doctor greeted me with a handshake and wasted no time getting to the point. He asked if I had ever experienced an injury to my scrotum. I recounted how I had been kicked in the groin while wrestling, resulting in a severe swelling that landed me in the hospital. The doctor explained that this injury likely caused fertility issues as my sperm count was extremely low, making natural conception highly improbable. Stunned by this revelation, I realized the extent of the deception in my marriage and the life I had been living. I canceled my remaining appointments, including the scheduled vasectomy. Leaving the clinic, I felt numb, like a character from The Walking Dead. I knew I had to uncover the truth about my life without arousing suspicion from Janice. I spent the rest of the day in a bar across the street from the clinic, jotting down a list of things I needed to do on the bartender's pad. After finishing my drink, I reviewed my list. Behave normally, test the kids, reach out to Fred, have a conversation with her dad, safeguard the finances, get screened for STDs, search for a new place to live, discover the truth behind everything, and get revenge. Fred is a friend of mine that had just gone through a divorce. The following morning, I woke up with a throbbing headache and began tackling the tasks on my list. Janice gave me a hard time about coming home drunk last night, but I acted like everything was fine. My first fib of the day was telling Janice that Fred was feeling down and we ended up drinking together. Later, I spent the evening in the garage, both before and after dinner, working on my tools. During dinner, I praised Janice's cooking, asked Jacob about his day at preschool, and doted on my 2-year-old daughter. The most challenging part was bedtime, when I had to pretend everything was normal, kissed Janice goodnight, and pretended to doze off. I collected saliva swabs from the kids and myself, then dropped them off at the clinic. Next, I went to the bank to open my own checking account. I called Janice and lied, saying I had an urgent repair job in LA and would be away for a few days. Instead, I flew to the Keys to meet Janice's father, whom I had never met before. It struck me that I was lying more than ever before, and while it didn't feel good, it seemed necessary for now. At the airport, I called my friend Fred to discuss the possibility of my marriage going downhill. Since he was at work, we planned to chat when I got back from Florida, and he promised to keep our conversation confidential. Larry Adonios, who ran a charter fishing boat in Key Largo, was surprised by my call but agreed to meet. I flew to Miami, rented a car, stayed overnight at a hotel, and planned to drive to his marina the next day. Larry steered his boat to the dock precisely at noon. His 2 clients disembarked with their catch of fish. Larry, a handsome man standing at 5 or 11 inches with a slim build, gray hair, and a deep Greek fisherman's tan, scanned the area until he spotted me, likely from the Christmas card Janice sent him with our family photo. He approached me and extended his hand for a firm handshake. "Pleasure to meet you, Simon. I'm guessing this isn't just a social call," he said, getting straight to the point. I quickly explained why I had sought him out. "Wait a sec, Penny told you that Henry was her brother?" Larry asked, trying to hide a smile. "He's not her brother, he's her on and off lover, and the reason why our marriage fell apart. People think I'm the bad guy for leaving my family, but let me tell you why I'm here in Key Largo." Larry proceeded to share his story. Janice started playing basketball in grade school, and by high school, she was good enough to join the traveling AAU team. It was a financial strain because I insisted Penny accompany her as a chaperone. We hoped it would pay off with a college scholarship for Janice. So I stayed home and worked extra hours while Janice and Penny spent at least 2 weekends away each month. I wasn't initially concerned about Penny being away because I trusted Janice and assumed she would alert me if her mom showed any inappropriate interest in one of the dads. And for the first year, everything seemed fine. But things took a turn in the second year. The boys' and girls' elite teams started traveling together more frequently, sometimes twice a month. Janice took an interest in one of the boys on their elite team named Henry Bishop Jr. to distinguish him from his father, Henry Bishop Sr. Can you see where this is going, Simon? Henry Sr. was on the road with the boys' team as a chaperone, and it turned out the Adonio's women caught the eye of the Bishop men. The Bishops had a thing for white women. It turns out Bishop Sr.'s mom was white, as was Bishop Jr.'s. I eventually discovered that every night while traveling, Jr. would visit Janice's room while Penny spent the night with Sr. It seemed like a sweet deal until another parent took pity on me and tipped me off. I hired a private investigator and gathered evidence while they were out of town. By the time they returned, I had moved into the spare room, and Penny was served with divorce papers that week. Penny tried to convince me it had only happened twice, but that was a lie, so I went through with the divorce. What hurt the most was Janice's betrayal. I thought we had a good relationship, but apparently she preferred her boyfriend's Johnson. So I left Oregon, moved here, and never looked back. I probably stared at Larry with a dazed expression, trying to understand how I ended up in such a mess. He looked at me and continued his story without much sympathy. When I saw the Christmas card with your family photo and the two kids that didn't resemble you, I made some calls to my friends out west. They did some digging and told me what they found. Sorry to break it to you, Simon, but chances are your two kids are Henry Jr.'s. I don't get it, Larry. If she's involved with this Henry guy, why didn't she just marry him instead of me? Because, my boy, both Henrys have a knack for trouble and ending up in jail. The first time Henry Jr. got caught selling drugs to an undercover cop. He was only 20, a college sophomore on a basketball scholarship. But like father, like son, just like Henry Sr., Jr. always wanted more. More money, cars, women, you name it. He ended up serving 7 years because he didn't cooperate and had an illegal tool when he got busted. My sources found out he was released from prison about a year before your son was born. He messed up again before Jacob was born, did another stint for felony offense, and went back in for 18 months. He probably got out just in time to get Janice pregnant with your little girl. I could have stepped in once I found out what was happening, but I chose to stay out of it. I didn't know you, and it didn't seem like my place to interfere. I just assumed you were okay with everything. Nope, not okay at all. I can't believe how foolish I've been for the past 4 years. How could I have been so naive? You're not foolish, Simon. You were just in love, and my awful ex-wife took advantage of that. From what I've heard, you're a talented carpenter with a thriving business. That takes intelligence. Let me tell you what I've learned from years of taking supposedly smart people out fishing on my boat. Most of them only know 1 or 2 things well, and that's it. They use that knowledge like a shield. My ex and daughter exploited your trust in them as family and your trusting nature. Plus, you were deceived by an expert. Let me explain. Penny swore she had only been with Henry twice. I didn't believe her, so she agreed to take a lie detector test. She passed it. The examiner asked the question multiple times, and the results were consistent. Penny was telling the truth. But something didn't sit right with me, so I asked Janice to take the test. Penny was livid, calling me names for putting my daughter through that. Janice clearly didn't have Penny's skill, and when she took the test, it revealed that the 2 couples had been involved for 5 months. Consider that a lesson if they ever offer to take a test to prove they're telling the truth. I thanked Larry for the insight. He offered to treat me to a drink and dinner, but I declined. It was time to head home and strategize my next steps. I caught the overnight flight to Portland and spent Wednesday working on my plans. The list I made 2 days ago was expanding to include hiring an attorney. Gathering evidence, Fred joined me for dinner that night and gave me some valuable advice. He suggested not hiring his lawyer, but instead using the same aggressive attorney his wife used. We had drinks and shared our frustrations for a few hours, and then he let me stay at his place. That meant one less night tiptoeing around Janice. On Thursday, I scheduled an appointment with the attorney, rearranged some finances, secured a job out of town for the following week, and bought 2 voice-activated recorders. I figured video wasn't necessary. Besides, I didn't think I could handle watching some stranger with my wife. Listening was bad enough. If I saw them together, I might end up doing something rash. That evening, I returned home from my fake work trip. Janice didn't suspect anything as I spun a tale about meeting a famous reality TV star. Everything I recounted was based on an article I read in People magazine at the airport in Miami. Lying was becoming second nature to me, although still unpleasant. When I mentioned I'd be in Seattle for the entire following week, working for a wealthy Microsoft executive, which was true, Janice didn't seem bothered. Once she went to bed, I discreetly placed one recorder in the kitchen and another in the bedroom the next day. After testing both devices, I loaded my tools into my truck for the trip up north. I threw myself into my work. The clients in Seattle turned out to be a delightful couple with great taste and ample funds. It was a much-needed distraction from an otherwise lousy week. I drove back home Sunday night, eager to listen to the recordings the next morning. Listening was a mix of emotions. It was disheartening because, as I anticipated, Janice and her lover spent the week in intimate activities in the bedroom. Yet, there was a hint of satisfaction because I caught a revealing conversation between Junior and someone else. It occurred after Janice had stepped into the shower. Here's what the recorder picked up. "Hey man, you ready for this? I just got some inside info on a big opportunity." Janice was at the clinic and overheard an elderly couple chatting about their upcoming trip to Israel. She gathered enough details for us to know it'll be an easy job. Janice even found out their address, and it's in a nice part of town. "If you're interested, let me know. I'm scoping out the place tomorrow, and they'll be away next month." Whoever Junior was talking to must have agreed, because the rest of the conversation was all about planning the robbery while the elderly couple was out of town. My dilemma was whether to report Janice when I turned in Junior to the police. It would be fitting if Janice spent some time behind bars, but I wasn't keen on babysitting kids who weren't mine while their parents lounged in jail. Okay, whenever I read about wussy husbands, they always say they still love the kids, blah, blah, blah. Maybe my wounds were still too fresh, but right now, I couldn't care less about Janice's kids. They could end up in jail along with her. Most likely, my lying witch mother-in-law can spend her retirement years raising the offspring of her lies. For the next month, I played it cool and treaded carefully around Janice. The hidden recorders kept rolling while I was away for work most of the time. Junior had no clue he was being recorded. He kept chatting with his partner, giving away all the details about their upcoming heist. On the night of the robbery, I pretended to be out of town, but instead, I parked a rental car near my house. When Junior and his buddy left the scene, I dialed the cops from a disposable phone, posing as a concerned neighbor. "Officer, my neighbors are away, and I just saw two guys loading stuff into their van. It's a dark brown van with this license plate number. They drove off south on Hiawatha Drive. I followed them, and from a distance, I watched as the police surrounded the van and arrested the two crooks. Here's where things get dicey. The night before the heist, I planted a tool under the driver's seat of Henry's van. It's not something I'm proud of, but somehow, I'm not losing any sleep over it. Let's just say a good friend gave it to me and I filed the serial number off so it couldn't be traced back to him. You see, since Henry is a repeat felon, he's not allowed to have a tool. This would be his third strike, which means he could be in prison for a long time, considering our state's 3 strikes law. Given that he was robbing a house, I didn't feel too bad about planting the tool. It was just a precaution to ensure he wouldn't get off with a lighter sentence. Phase 1 of my revenge was done. When I got home the next day, Janice was in tears in the den. Her mom was consoling her on the couch, and Uncle Henry was in my favorite chair looking miserable. "What's going on, Janice? Why are you crying?" "Oh, Simon, it's terrible. A friend of mine is dying of cancer," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Mom and Uncle Henry came to help me cope because I didn't know when you'd be back." As she spoke, I realized Janice had learned how to lie from her mom. It also dawned on me that I'd never get the answers I wanted. Janice was too good at deception to give me a straight story. "Well, Janice, I hate to add to your bad news, but here are the divorce papers. We're done." I wish I had a camera to capture their reactions when I dropped the bomb. It was like something from a cheesy sitcom, with all 3 of them wide-eyed and gaping. That memory's going to stick with me. I left without saying another word, hopped in my truck, and drove southeast. Janice would get served officially the next day by someone from my lawyer's office. The copy I left her, along with a letter, was just for my own satisfaction. The letter said, "Janice, you lying witch. My lawyer will handle our divorce. I left you the house but took everything else from our accounts except $3,000. You deal with the mortgage, bills, and all that. Not my problem anymore. I know those kids aren't mine. I'll miss them, but I can't look at them without thinking about how you got pregnant. Maybe Henry can help support his 2 kids by selling himself in prison. It's in your best interest not to contest the divorce terms. I'd hate to see your kids with both parents in jail, raised by your mom and Uncle Henry. Yes, I know you told Junior about that old couple's trip. If Henry doesn't rat you out and if you don't agree to my terms, I'll call the cops and tell them to check the clinic records to find out who spilled the beans about the couple's schedule. Trust me, I'll do it without blinking and have a good laugh while I'm at it. Don't even consider reaching out to me in any way. After everything I've found out about you and your mom lately, I'd prefer chatting with a mad dog over hearing your dishonest voice again. I'd say good luck, but that'd be a lie. Go to heck, and tell your awful mother she's welcome there too. Simon, phase 2 of my revenge was done. Phase 3 would require some patience, but if things went according to plan, it would be quite amusing. Over the past month, I managed to buy 2 colonies of carpenter ants online. It's surprising what you can purchase on the internet these days. On a visit to Penny's house, I sneaked down to her basement and discreetly placed the ant colonies in hidden spots. Over the next few years, the ants will gradually weaken the rafters and walls until the house becomes unsalvageable. Penny isn't the best at keeping her house tidy, so she'll likely never notice a thing. Did I mention that for the past 6 years, I've been footing the bill for all of Penny's utilities and household expenses? Back then, I happily paid every bill, thinking it was the least I could do for such a wonderful mother-in-law, the woman I once considered like a second parent. That was before I discovered her involvement in the plot to deceive me. Now, because I handled the bills and the house was mortgage-free, it was simple for me to cancel her homeowner's insurance, which I did that month. No one would suspect a thing until they tried to file a claim for damages caused by the ants. Phase 4. The Sicilians say it best. Revenge is best served cold. At least it was for me. When I drove away that day in my truck, I had all the clothes, money, tools, and personal belongings necessary to start fresh. I headed to the Florida Keys, where Larry assisted me in selling my truck and buying a boat. It would take some time to establish myself in the Caribbean, but I had the means to make it happen. I packed my tools aboard my new, previously owned 34-foot motorboat and set sail for the islands. For the next 3 years, I lived aboard the boat, taking odd jobs doing finishing work on various islands. One of my former clients, a Microsoft multimillionaire, purchased a small island in the Bahamas, where I spent 4 months working on his new home. I even completed some interior rooms on 2 mega yachts owned by Saudi princes. Life in the islands is unlike anywhere else. There's a mix of working class and poor folks, a small middle class, and only a handful of wealthy individuals. Over time, I built up a good reputation among the well-off residents across different islands. Keeping my living expenses low definitely helped. After 3 years, I found myself making more money than I was spending. And let me tell you, I was having a blast. Was I meeting women? Absolutely. It's practically impossible not to down here. Many women visit the island seeking adventure. Sure, some are looking for their first native experience, but there were plenty left over for me. I stayed in touch with a few friends back in Portland, especially Fred, who had patched things up with his ex-wife. I made it clear to all my friends not to spill the beans about my whereabouts to Janice or give her my cell number. During the 2nd year of my island escape, I convinced Fred and his wife Emily to join me in St. Martin for a week on my boat. I was excited to catch up with an old friend. Imagine my surprise when I arrived at the dock to pick them up and found Janice standing there with them. She looked stunning. Even in her mid-30s, she had the body of a 20-year-old, flaunting it in a bikini top and Daisy Dukes. I halted the boat about 40 feet from the dock and reversed another 100 feet before cutting the engine. Right on cue, my cell phone rang. It was Fred. "Fred, what's going on? Why did you bring her here?" "Simon, it's not my fault. Janice has been pestering Emily for information about you. When she learned about our trip, she practically forced Emily to bring her along. Emily made it clear that if I didn't agree, I wouldn't get any action for the next year." "Fred, you held up your end of the deal, so at least you won't be stuck solo for the next year. But you're not joining us on the boat this week. My bad. You might want to head back home, or if you're staying, try the casino hotel. They're usually not busy this time of year. Later." As I ended the call, I could hear yelling from the dock. It seemed like both Emily and Janice were about to blow a gasket. I called down to Kelly in the boat's galley. "Hey Kelly, mind coming up on deck?" Kelly, a school teacher I met last year at a party thrown by my Microsoft client, was spending her summer break cruising the islands with me. And let me tell you, she's drop-dead gorgeous. We were just friends with benefits, though. She was bound to marry a millionaire someday, but for now, she was enjoying her 20s to the fullest. A week later, Fred sent me an email apologizing and saying he understood my actions completely. He and Emily stayed on the island for the week, but Janice flew back home after spending the rest of the day in tears. So maybe that was phase 4, and perhaps after that scene, you, the reader, might think I was done, but I wasn't. Like they say, revenge is best served cold. It was my 4th year in the Caribbean, and I was doing a remodeling job in St. Bart's for a wealthy French family. I know some Americans have issues with the French, but my experience has been quite positive. I've taken the time to learn some French, and my attempts at conversation have been appreciated by those I've met. The job was going to take me at least a month, and the owners went back home after the first week. 2 days later, their daughter arrived. The moment I saw her, my heart and mind were captivated. I don't know what the French call it, but my Italian mother would say I was thunderstruck. What's more, as this young lady set down her suitcases, she looked at me and gave a smile with both her lips and her eyes. "Hello, Mr. Messina. My parents warned me you would be here working, but assured me it would be fine as long as I stayed out of your way." I was tempted to reply that all I wanted was for her to be in my way. "Excuse me, miss. You know my name, but I don't know yours. My parents didn't inform you that I was expected?" "No, I'm afraid not." "Then I'm sorry. My name is Simone. If you prefer, I can get a room in town while you work. It wouldn't be too much trouble. Please, feel free to stay here. Your parents were fine staying in the house while I worked. Unless the noise bothers you, I've been staying in the guest house, but I can go back to my boat at the marina if you'd rather." "My parents said you were polite, and they wouldn't have let me come if they were worried. Please keep using the guest house. I'll feel better knowing a gentleman is nearby." The following weeks were like a dream. Simone fit the classic French woman stereotype from the movies I've seen. She's 5'4", with small breasts that suit her slim figure, short black hair reminiscent of Audrey Tautou from Amélie. She moved gracefully, like a dancer. I was completely infatuated. And she was amazing. Despite her wealthy upbringing, she was down to earth. Most days she prepared lunch herself and we'd eat together on the patio. During our first lunch, we joked about our similar names. Simone had a fantastic sense of humor, and I did my best to make her smile or laugh, just to see her joyful expression. I remained infatuated, and by the end of the second week, I was in love. She broke the ice. "Simon, I see how you look at me, and I think I understand what it means. I also believe you're aware of the difference in our social status, and that's probably why you've kept your distance. But let me tell you what I see. I see a remarkable man who has succeeded despite the hardships life threw at him. You're not bitter. You still seek joy in life. I may be beautiful and wealthy, but I haven't achieved much on my own. I try to be kind and good, and I believe I am. What I'm saying is, please don't doubt yourself. See me as a woman who's fallen for a great guy." I couldn't believe my luck. This amazing woman was asking for a chance with me. Without hesitation, I held her close and kissed her. We kissed for a while before she suggested, "Let's go to your room." We made love. I put in all the effort, remembering everything Janice taught me about satisfying a woman. She kept repeating, "Oh my God," as we went on for hours until we both fell asleep from exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up with Simone still on top of me, smiling down at me. She moved just enough to keep us going, and then she said something that made me feel on top of the world. "Where did you learn to please a woman? You make love like a Frenchman." I could have left it at that, feeling content with my new life. But there was one last thing I needed to do. 5 years after marrying Simone, and a decade since leaving Janice, I sent a photo to Janice from our home in Paris. It was a picture of me, Simone, and our 2 kids. Yes, we went the in vitro route, on the beach during our visit to Simone's parents in St. Bardas. Simone looked stunning in her bikini, and both Jules and Juliet had bright smiles. Underneath the photo, I wrote, "Me, my wife, and my 2 wonderful kids wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year."